Hey everyone, you are listening to Virtuous Society, where we share community insights and secrets. Today we speak to Jon Allen. We have unpacked how getting injured during his military service while defusing a bomb actually got him to Bitcoin in 2013, and how being a Boy Scout and a World of Warcraft fanatic took him on a journey of building communities by himself, and later on, to build tools that serve other communities as well. He is the co-founder of Game7 and CEO of Summon, a platform that enables communities to gamify both participation and engagement. Make sure you listen to the full episode. Thank you for listening. I want to dive right into it and start off with a difficult question.
All right, let's go for it.
Why does your work matter?
Why does my work matter? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think for me, I just generally like working on things that I find interesting. So I think there's like a couple of different ways to look at it. It's like, why does this matter to me? And why do I hope this matters to other people? So why this matters for me is because I think that it's something that's challenging. It's like, how do you organize communities? How do you make a meritocratic nation that can then lead to making a meritocratic world? Like for me, organizing communities and organizing groups is something that's very challenging. You know, it's like I was very, very down the Bitcoin rabbit hole in 2013, and I found that challenging, gotten more into cryptography, kind of got more into the technical side in 2017, and then more into kind of DAOs and communities in the last couple of years. And I feel like each of those had its own certain challenges. And so for me, it matters to me because I think it's hard. And I find it fun. You know, there's not a simple equation that it's like, 1 + 1 = 2, where it's like, okay, I've solved this. Something that I feel like is a black hole of time and effort and can continually be improved. And so it's something that's just like a worthwhile endeavor to try to make the way that communities connect and make decisions and interact better. And that better is just so subjective. And there's so many different ways of kind of like analyzing that. And so I think why it matters to me is because it's hard, it's challenging, and I just enjoy working with people. Why I hope that it matters to other people is because I think that camaraderie and this kind of like overwhelming sense of loneliness has really kind of pervaded society. I think with kind of like the COVID lockdown, it's really expedited that. It was really interesting, kind of like the Surgeon General of the United States actually put out a memo that he said that loneliness is something that is extremely concerning in the United States. I think that this has kind of proliferated abroad. You have a bunch of different groups who are just saying that like loneliness is something that is extremely pervasive and concerning and actually detrimental to just humans as a whole. And so I hope that, by bringing people together, by having them have a sense of belonging and a kind of community, that this is like fixing that problem. So I think it's kind of like this like lofty kind of like North Star that we're targeting. But I hope that by building some of the things we're building with Summon and the community with Game7, we're able to chip away at some of that potentially.
Nice. I want to go back a little bit to the start. You mentioned meritocracy, just for people who might not know what that word means. Can you shed some light on that?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's like all these different organizing structures, right? And I think like all of them have trade-offs. I think the one that I find most interesting and kind of like most relevant is really like meritocracy. And so like the kind of like root of that being merit, right? And so like merit in a meritocracy, it's really what you contribute or what you do it really matters. And like those are the people who should have the most influence. So it's really not based off of any other factors other than, like how well known you are, how many like Twitter followers you have, right? Or like, all these other things are like, who your family is or things like this. It's really, you come into the community, you engage, what are the things that you're providing to the community? What are the actionable kind of steps and actions that you're taking within that community? And we're really trying to base it off of that. And that was really kind of the catalyst, trying to build a meritocratic nation, gaming nation with Game7 was really kind of the catalyst to start building Summon, where it was like this idea of having a meritocracy where like what you contribute equals how much influence and kind of like power you have within the community. It was a great tagline. And then it's like, okay, well, we need a system to actually track the merit, we need to track the contributions, right? To be able to kind of like apply that. And so it's like been very interesting that it's like you have this kind of term that's been referenced quite a bit throughout history. But by using a lot of the kind of like new tech and new tools that we have, I think it makes it much easier to facilitate something that's much more clear and transparent.
Nice. Amazing. So before we dive deeper into Summon stuff, I wanted to kind of ask, how did you get here? You mentioned camaraderie, and we know that you have a military background. Was that kind of the kickstart to pretty much building something that is centered around community?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far you want to go back. I think the military had a lot to do with it, right? But it's like, it's like I was in Boy Scouts before, I'm Eagle Scout, so a brief flex. But it's like I think like really that was like the start of it. It's like going through that, having very close friends, like going backpacking and kind of like just trying to get different merit badges and things like that, and learning kind of like the base foundation of like leadership. I think I learned a lot of lessons there, and then later I was in jazz bands, very competitive kind of groups, and like just the camaraderie of trying to like win different kind of jazz festivals.
What did you play?
And kind of like, I played alto and soprano saxophone. So
nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it was like, it was really fun. Right. And like being part of that group where it was like, hey, we want to be better. We want to win. Right. It was kind of this really like, just like high intensity mindset. That kind of like our teacher kind of like instilled upon us. And then, later on kind of in the military, I did explosive ordnance disposal. So in building, basically disarmed bombs for 5 years in the military. And I think like just, again, that sense of camaraderie, right? Where it's like you really have to trust the people that you're working with, intensely trust, right? We work in teams of 3, and a lot of other places in the military, it's kind of like rock, paper, rank, like it really matters your rank. Whereas like for EOD, oftentimes we wouldn't wear rank because it's like you have to deeply trust the person. You'd have a team lead, that team lead ultimately made the decision. But, when if you're kind of making these decisions that are based on semi-information and you kind of have to make the best decisions given all of the knowledge, the previous training that you have, but the current situation, you want everyone's input. You want somebody to call out something. You want somebody to be like, hey, here's my gut feeling about it. So I think that sense of camaraderie and trust, right? Was really kind of interesting. So I guess like, didn't necessarily kind of like answer directly where that came from, right? But it's like, I think like being part of each of these groups, had these like different aspects to it. And it's really kind of like shaped, the way that I think I developed. And it was, it's just really interesting taking bits and pieces of that, but realizing that every group in and of itself was just special, because you felt like you were part of something bigger than yourself, and you ended up doing something that was more challenging than you could have done yourself. And I think that was like significantly rewarding for me as I was growing up.
Amazing. How did all of that translate into building online communities and what you're doing now with Summon?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. So like, I co-founded blockchain at Berkeley, and then, ended up deciding to start a conference, which, I don't recommend to anyone who's thinking about doing it. Kind of like my thought process was like, how hard could it be, right? So a couple other folks like Ronan and Steven Chen, like we ended up co-founding us at Blockchain Week, and we did that 2 years, and then COVID hit. So I think kind of like my first taste of really trying to build like a digital community at scale was we ended up merging with one other conference during COVID because they were also struggling. You make all these plans for a conference, and then COVID happens, right? And you immediately have to be like, hey, are we just canceling it entirely? Or what we did is we said, hey, like let's merge these 2 conference brands and make a new event called Unitize. And so I think it was like, had to learn a lot and how to try to be like, hey, how do we organize thousands of people at scale? Have these kind of like, different digital breakout rooms, kind of have this like happy hour, have the speakers, have like attendees kind of communicating and talking, right? And try to thread through as much of that kind of like social aspect and engagement aspect that people really want for a conference. And I think that was kind of like my first taste of kind of like trying to have a digital community at scale and really realizing the shortcomings of pretty much all the different digital conference platforms really were not ideal, right? It honestly wasn't a great experience. It was really just because like it was COVID, we had to do it. And so, I think that was kind of like my first taste of trying to organize a digital community and realizing the shortcomings. And then later on, when I got more into DAOs, it was obviously very digital native, right? And so that was kind of when I went further down the rabbit hole.
Nice. It seems like for a lot of people, COVID was kind of the turning point from looking at things from just an IRL perspective into digital perspective, and kind of broadening their horizon in that realm. So that's interesting that was the case for you as well.
Yeah.
I wanted to also ask just regarding like MMORPGs, because Summon is pretty much pitching itself as an MMORPG. So how does your experience in playing and interacting with MMORPGs shaped your perspective regarding communities as a whole and the way that you've built Summon?
Yeah, so I think an important nuance, right? I think it's like MMORPG inspired, right? Because it's like it's one of those things that trying to make a community system and have it be game-like rather than a game, I think is like very important nuance, right? Because it's like I would love to have it be a game. I don't think we're quite there yet, right? But it's like a lot of it is inspired. And so it's like kind of before the military, I had like a brief stint in playing World of Warcraft. It's like in 12 months, I had 6 months time played. So I was playing like an obscene amount of World of Warcraft. And I think for me, it was really interesting because it's like, you have a lot of these like social media platforms that really, push themselves as like a way to connect and a way to make friends. But really, if we're being honest, like they're just a way of kind of farming your dopamine and making you engage with ads and contents, right? So they can extract value out of you. And so you kind of have this like soulless shell wrapping itself in kind of this social friendship layer. And you don't really get that out of a lot of these social media platforms, which I just think is unfortunate. Whereas with a lot of games, they don't purport themselves to be ways of making friends or finding connection. But if you look at the statistics, roughly 80% of people who play games play it for the social aspect. Some crazy high number. I think it's like 50 or 60% of people say that like, hey, they've made very close friends and made like close connections that they've actually maintained through games. And so I think like a lot of kind of that influenced my mindset is like some of my closest and best friends that I made during that period were from playing World of Warcraft. And so for me, and I think a lot of other people, be it like RuneScape or kind of like, like Halo, if you're more into FPSs, World of Warcraft, a lot of people remember that as like some of the best times in their life, right? And it was really because of like that shared experience, shared success, shared struggle, right? That competition, just a lot of these kind of like things that cause people to bond in real life. I think gaming is much better, like what more well suited to do.
Yeah.
And also I think like World of Warcraft specifically for me, just a lot of the mechanics, be it like the progression, right? As you progress, aligning again with that meritocracy topic that we talked about, right? As you progress, you get different items, and you can visually see that this person has put in the time and effort. So we pulled in a lot of that into Summon. I think that's something that's kind of unique and new and novel that we're trying to introduce to a kind of community. And then the other piece is just like, badges and kind of like different items that you can reward or earn and different kind of achievements, right? So just pulling in a lot of these in-game primitives that you see in MMOs and other games, but pulling those as primitives that you can then implement for your community to further engage them, to further incentivize them, to further recognize them for their contributions. So all of that is really kind of this MMO-inspired kind of layer that we've added for community managers.
Perfect. So it's pretty much gamifying your contributions to the community without really making just a game out of it.
Exactly. And I think it's like the way that we built it is that like, we're not trying to say that like, hey, here's this monolith, right? You have to engage with the full stack. It's set. Things are the way they are. Sorry, it's locked. If you want something changed, talk to us in 6 months, right? The way we built it is very flexible and modular, that it's like, hey, if you just want kind of like this, 3D viewer SDK, right? If you just want this kind of governance module, if you just want a leaderboard, if you just want the on-chain inventory system, right? Like all of these are just pieces that we're planning on releasing so people can just build things themselves in whatever way they want. And I think the biggest piece of it as well is that we built the integrations in a way that's very flexible, that, any reasonably motivated engineer should be able to build whatever bespoke integration they want in a couple of days and just plug it in. Because I think one of the problems with a lot of community platforms and kind of like harkening back to the conference days is it's fixed, it's set.
Yeah.
If you want something different, you can't. If you use it and then 2 months later you start to outgrow it, too bad, you outgrew it. Find something different, right? And so I think we're really trying to align with the Web3 ethos of like, hey, let's have this be permissionless innovation. Let's try to lean into and embrace the fractal growth that comes from having Web3 communities be able to contribute to the project at scale. So that's something that's like very fundamental to how someone's building a platform.
Nice. I think everyone can understand the gaming aspect of why did you derive stuff from MMORPGs to Summon, but why Web3? Why necessarily pick Web3 as the space?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think it's like, for me, there's a couple of things. I think one, Web3 communities were low-hanging fruit because I think they're kind of craving something different and something better and really kind of pushing the boundaries of what's needed. I think a lot of kind of Web2 communities are generally, I mean, I'm probably not super happy, right? But it's like, I think like Web3 communities specifically, we're generally unhappy with the current stack. You know, a lot of people are saying, hey, we have all these beautiful Web3 tools, and then, okay, cool, let's have Discord and Telegram and Twitter and all these like very clunky, convoluted kind of Web2 tools that really aren't aligned with what we're building in Web3. So I think one, there was like a desire for something new. So that made it a path of like less resistance. I think the other piece there is that everyone's been very excited for DAOs, right? You know, it was in the original Ethereum white paper, this idea of DAOs. And every kind of cycle in crypto, it's been like, hey, DAOs are going to be this huge thing. There's so much potential there. And so for me, I kind of like to look at where are these huge deltas between expectation or potential and actuality, right? And so it's like back in 2013 when I was into Bitcoin, it was like, hey, Bitcoin's going to change the world. But it was really a group of people kind of talking about it, building about it, right? And it's like talking about the potential. And so that was very interesting to me because it was a huge delta. You know, again, in 2017, more focused on kind of like the privacy preserving, like specifically ZK space. Huge delta between, hey, ZK can change the world, and here, you know, the actual circuits that we have developed, and here's the actual functionality for it, right? It's like people were just talking about, hey, you know, you could have this like wristband to enter, you know, without actually telling your age. And so like huge delta there. I think again, for the DAO space, there was this like massive delta between, hey, you know, governments could be run by DAOs, which, you know, it seemed to be kind of the gotcha question about a year and a half ago for every interview. Not so much anymore, but it's like, and yeah, most DAOs that were just simple investment DAOs, which let's pool capital and we have some multi-sig and we can just vote to invest in things. So I think like choosing the Web3 space, it was like DAOs first and foremost. They need a system for robust governance. You know, they really care about how kind of communities can make decisions at scale. And they really have a need for like a better way of kind of coordinating and organizing themselves. And so I think that governance aspect was one of the biggest catalysts for choosing Web3. And then kind of like the underpinnings of all of that is that I think like the Web3 stack is extremely valuable, and not only kind of having your identity and reputation, but also allowing other people to build off of that in new and novel ways. So there's a lot of C's, and like happy to unpack any of those, right? But it's like, I think, you know, path of least resistance, kind of like there's a lot of communities who need this technology at scale and desire this technology at scale. And I think it offers kind of like a very interesting way of kind of organizing things and scaling.
Perfect. I think maybe let's unpack a little bit more of the DAO aspect, just for people who might not know what a DAO is. Can you just explain briefly?
Yeah, so I mean, like, let's go to the definition, right? It's like decentralized autonomous organization, right? So like, what does that mean? You know, it's like decentralized is all things in Web3, you know, or trying to be at least. You know, I think not so much autonomous at this point. I mean, again, there's this delta between what they kind of want to be and I think what they currently are, right? But I think it's like, it's really, let's kind of get away from the definition, right? You know, I think at a very high level, it's a bunch of people come together. They want to make shared decisions, and they want to have governance and kind of like a clear governance structure for how they make those decisions. So I think like just from a simple mental model, the easiest way to think about it is that rather than top down, like most companies are decided, that you have a CEO and you have the executive suite and they're kind of passing down their decisions to everyone who's junior to that. You basically have a bottom up structure where you have the community who's actually making decisions, right? So that's, I think, the simplest mental model for what a DAO is people coming together, making decisions at scale, and having it be much more bottom up rather than the traditional centralized company top down structure.
Perfect. Okay, nice. So I wanted to follow up a little bit and kind of see how building Summon shaped your view regarding what community actually is and what should it look like. And maybe that's an ambiguous question because it depends on what the community is set to achieve. But let's take the traditional, not necessarily traditional, but your most common Web3 game and its community that Summon is aiming to serve. How do you envision that community becoming a success and actually turning from like a user base into an actual community?
Yeah. So I think there's like, it's kind of interesting to me because I think you called it out, right? That there's not a one size fits all. I think that's what's kind of fun about it is that, communities are generally so nebulous, right? Or it's really based on kind of like what they want to do. And I think that's what I'm really looking for is to allow people to create these experiments to see what works and what doesn't. And I think for kind of like DAOs or just kind of communities as a whole, I think that really kind of offering the ability for communities to experiment at scale is going to benefit all of us. Because what I realize is like there's a bunch of people who are building communities all in parallel. They're doing so much parallel work, and that's extremely inefficient. But if you're actually kind of like organizing some standards and best practices and kind of having these different pieces they can piece together in a very Lego way, what's kind of interesting is that allows people to very rapidly iterate and innovate. And so if you have those rapid kind of like iteration and innovation cycles, what's interesting about that is like very quickly you can start to speed run and be like, hey, like this works for this mandate or this community goal. This doesn't for this goal, right? And so I think like just one, I'm like a huge kind of Harari fan, and that these millions of experiments through time have kind of distilled us to a couple of these different organizing, structures for kind of society. But I think, kind of as he mentions, we kind of started to slow down that innovation significantly. There's not millions of experiments every day at scale for these things. What's kind of nice is now we have this digital layer on top of that. And I think we can start to instantiate kind of like that experimental society again. So I think, not to go too down the rabbit hole there, but it's like, I think that's like one piece. I think the other piece that I'm really trying to push is that I think especially Web3 communities have really leaned on we care about economic contribution and how that's expressed is through a token. So I think there's been a ton of experimentation with how do I distribute a token and how is a token used to influence the community. I think that's very interesting, right? It's definitely novel. I think there's been like some great experiments and some really poor experiments, right? As you are going to have with any kind of thing that's new and novel. I think that's a little bit challenging though, because like it really leads to $1, 1 token, 1 vote. Or I was early to the community, so I have more tokens. And that really doesn't align with your long-term alignment with the project or your long-term ability to kind of influence the success of that community. So what we're really trying to do with Summon is kind of paint more of a spectrum. So we already have this, I care about your economic contribution with different token models. But what we don't have is I care about your engagement. So again, kind of that meritocracy aspect is really interesting. Because I think if you kind of paint those two ends of the spectrum of I only care about your contribution or your engagement, and I only care about your economic contribution, almost every community can sit somewhere on that spectrum of maybe it's 60% contribution, 40%, engagement, 40% economic contribution, right? Or 50-50 or 70-30, right? And so I think like that's really the kind of lever that we're really looking at. It's like, how do we make these kind of aligned, lasting, like durable communities that can evolve with the needs of all of the members. So let's loop all of that back to your original question of the Web3 gaming community. What does that ideally look like? I don't necessarily think all games need to be a DAO, right? And need to have their community decide all of these things, right? But I think you need to be thoughtful around that of try to be kind of as decentralized and as bottom up as possible. Because I really think there's something special to having the community influence decisions and feel some sense of ownership. But a lot of times if you're saying, hey, like I'm doing something very technical, right? Or I have these decisions that could be game breaking if I make the wrong decision. I would love to have 10,000 gamers who just randomly go into the community making these decisions. But I think a lot of them would say like, hey, I'm maybe not best suited to do this, right? And so maybe that's the time when you're saying, hey, like people can self-select into certain roles that are specialized. Things that kind of affect the entire community and have to do with the token distribution or the economics. I think there's a case to be made that maybe the entire community or everyone who has a vested interest should be making those decisions. And so I think it's like really having these models of what should the entire community decide, what should be kind of more specialized committees, what should be somebody who's elected and appointed and able to be removed if they're making poor choices, right? So just having like a more nuanced understanding of, it's very easy to say, hey, this one person is deciding everything, they're the CEO. That's simple. That's if you want to go fast, right? If you want to go far, I think you have to be a little bit more thoughtful of how do we engage the community? How do we let people self-select into kind of these ownership or influential roles, right? And just be a little bit more thoughtful about what that construct looks like.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of the joke, it's like everyone wants a DAO, but nobody wants to DAO. It's kind of
exactly.
kind of the joke, right? It's like, it's challenging, but I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. Again, right, I think it is a huge delta between what DAO's potentials are and what people actually trying at scale. So that's why I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with Game7, right? Is I think we're fully leaning into how do we make a functional, kind of well-capitalized DAO and scale succeed? And how do we have it be a flagship example of what we've been talking about for years? Yeah.
Nice. Perfect. Okay, so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the experience so far and what have been, let's say, the most significant lessons you've learned both about just communities as a whole from building Summon and about the Web3 community overall, because you're a real OG. so both of those perspectives.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. So communities, what have I learned about communities and what have I learned about Web3? I mean, there's probably a lot of directions I could take this. I think, okay, let's start with communities. I think that what I've learned about communities is that, kind of, again, what I said is like, there isn't a one size fits all for all communities. I think for me, what's been really interesting has been how opinions get formed as far as, especially for decisions or just general sentiment or general culture. For me, I'm really interested in like the social dynamics of different communities. And it's so interesting how like one very outspoken vocal person can really kind of like influence the direction, right? You think that it's just kind of this general aggregate, and you kind of distill around something that's like rational. But a lot of communities are not rational, right? A lot of it is kind of like that initial perception or communication. And so I think that's something that you see where, I always tell a lot of DAOs that like the main thing that can frustrate people is if the community doesn't know how things work, or they're not communicative, or they're not necessarily trying to be as transparent, right? And so if people realize there's some kind of system that's working in the background that they're not privy to, they get very frustrated. And so I think it's like really like, how do you communicate effectively within a group? And then how do you kind of identify people who, and kind of like have, how do you kind of identify people who are like very influential, maybe for better or for worse, and try to kind of like, just as a general group, come to some kind of like rational alignment. I think like one of the stories that's really interesting to me is like in one of the kind of communities that I was involved in, we had a couple of people who were like very vocal and outspoken and just like generally very negative. They were just like, hey, like, why isn't this happening? Or why isn't this building faster? When token, like, all these negative things, right? And then what ended up happening was they got selected for a community role. They got selected as a community ambassador. And what was interesting is, having that simple conversation with them and being like, hey, I want you to be an ambassador for this project. They went from like the biggest opponent to that community and the biggest kind of negative catalyst for like every discussion to consistently positive, consistently coming up with solutions, right? It's just like a complete 180 based off of just like a role that was given on Discord. And I think that was like something that was very interesting to me. It was like, these people were really just like wanted kind of that attention, wanted some kind of like status, wanted to be heard and recognized. So yeah, I think there's a ton of stuff I could unpack as far as like community, but for me, like that social dynamics, I think is like the most interesting thing that I've realized is like how people contribute in a group, how people can affect the group, right? And how these small, subtle changes and kind of like structural changes you make in a community can significantly affect how people engage with it, and also how the community feels about it as a whole. I think about Web3. I mean, one of the reasons I got into Web3 was like, kind of after the military, after my last deployment, like a bit disillusioned with the world, like to be completely blunt, right? And then found Bitcoin, started talking with a lot of these kind of like very early Bitcoiners, and most of them had this real mentality of, we want to change the world. We can build everything better. Like all of the problems are solvable in the world. And just like that kind of optimistic, idealistic attitude was just completely infectious. And so that's something that I've really tried to align myself with. I think like most of my decisions on what I want to do in the crypto space have really had this really simple kind of like decision, right? Like differentiation is kind of missionary versus mercenary. I always want to align myself with missionaries. I think a lot of people see significant value in the crypto space, which attracts a lot of mercenaries because they're like, how do I extract the most value? Whereas missionaries are, I want to change the world. I want to improve it. I want to contribute, right? And be involved in something greater. And so for me, that was like, I think the biggest lesson was that kind of missionary versus mercenary kind of dynamic, and just like where to kind of align myself and where to spend time. And I think it served me like very well, right? It's like generally trying to align with missionaries has been something that's extremely rewarding. Whereas we've had a lot of negative ramifications in crypto from people who have more of that mercenary mindset. So
nice. Yeah, and I think it's also, we're seeing a lot of those kind of being shaken out of the market in each cycle, and those who are looking to play the long game and actually contribute and do something of use, of value, of meaning, those usually just stay. So.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's all time horizon stuff, right? It's like, I think like, mid to long term, it's like, missionaries are usually in it, right? I think like kind of having done a few venture funds, it's like that served extremely well for investing in folks. Like if they're really there because they're passionate about it, and they really want to build something to make a difference, when times are tough, they're going to stick around. Whereas if people are only there for the money, if, after like 1-2 years, things aren't working out, they're probably going to pivot to AI, and we saw a lot of people do this during the bear market, where they're like, I'm not really here for the potential of blockchain. I'm here because I think I can raise money and make a lot of money like doing it. And yeah, I think that's true for communities. I think that's true for kind of companies that are founding in the space. And I think that's true of just kind of like general friendships that you make in the space or people that you align yourself with. Really that time horizon mentality is quite important.
100%. It's funny. It was pretty much the meme of 2023 that everyone that were there in 2021 in blockchain and Web3 conferences are now in the AI.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's very shiny, right? It's like very interesting technology. I think like it's kind of like one of the really kind of influential things that I had read. I think it was back in like 2016 or 17. It's 2017 most likely. I was like this outlier venture paper. It was called like blockchain enabled convergence. And it talked about how blockchain in and of itself is an exponential technology. It kind of bucketed these different exponential technologies where you have like machine learning, you have AI, you have blockchain, right? And, kind of their investment thesis was, we don't want to invest in just blockchain. We want to invest in the intersection of exponential technologies. So they wanted to invest in where blockchain combines with AI. Blockchain combines with like machine learning, right? Because it's like, if one of them is an exponential technology by themselves, the combination of those is extremely interesting, right? I think they were extremely early, like, just in general, like I think a lot of the companies that they invested in didn't do that well, but I think kind of like that mentality, or the kind of like the thesis, I think was correct. It's just like all about timing. And now you're seeing like a lot of these AI application combined with blockchain, and you can start to see kind of how the dots connect. So I think it was like very correct, but very early, which was quite interesting. But I guess that's kind of like my justification for being interested in AI, right? Is like, let's find those intersections. But I think trying to go from something that you're a domain expert at, or been passionate about working in, and just pivoting to AI and trying to catch up to all the people who have been working on it for decades, probably not going to do very well for you.
Yeah, probably not the best strategy. So I want to continue with just a little bit more of insights. If you could do it pretty much all over again, what would you do differently?
Let's see. I would sell at every top, buy at every bottom. Just take me back a couple of years, and then I'll be retired. No, yeah. I mean, I guess let's kind of like narrow that scope, right? It's like, do it all. Like, what specifically are you interested in? Like,
I think let's say from 2013 onwards. I think that's kind of where the journey to create your first community and not just be a part of a community. I think that's where you started to build some communities. So 2013 onwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's interesting because like I consider myself very lucky in the things that I've kind of just like happened upon doing, or like, you know, finding myself as part of these groups, right? You know, it's like being at Berkeley at 2016 and meeting a bunch of other like extremely motivated people who wanted to build like a student organization, right? You know, I think like that was very interesting because all of a sudden we were consulting and building products for like Airbus and Qualcomm and BMW, right? And it's like they were all very interested, and you know, like Accenture and Deloitte weren't really that caught up. You know, they were pitching the dream for blockchain, but like just understanding the tech and the fundamentals and being able to build it, like they were still ramping up, right? And so I think it was like very timely, you know, starting SF Blockchain Week, it was super opportunistic, right? And ended up kind of really building my connections in the space and kind of just like my knowledge of the space. Like, you know, having never even heard of a hedge fund before I started at Berkeley and flying around to 6 countries on winter break with a couple of friends and raising 25 million, like this is, you know, something that it just kind of happened, right? You know, I think I was like I'm continually just always motivated to do something significant. But I think I've continually found people who have that similar mindset. And so, I mean, if I had to go back, I mean, obviously there's a bunch of different, you know, wish I invested in this, you know, or like
obviously
wish I passed on this, right? Or, you know, made some like subtle decisions. But I think just like the grand scheme of things, all of this has kind of like really influenced my perception of like what works, what doesn't work. And so, yeah, if I had to go back, I think I would do some things like very similar. Yeah.
Nice. Is there a specific, let's say, challenge that you remember out of the last decade that you think pretty much like helped you shape the mindset that you have today?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's hard to like really key in on any one individual challenge. I mean, I think the one that really kind of like set me on this path that was kind of interesting was like my last deployment to Afghanistan. You know, I actually had an infantry LT step on an IED. I ended up getting blown up, had 13 surgeries, was in the hospital for a month. And, you know, at that time I was fairly convinced I was going to stay in the military. You know, for me, it was like, I just absolutely loved it. It kind of like, you know, just like scratch the itch of kind of like the, you know, just the intensity, right? And kind of like the, just a lot of things. I really enjoyed it. You know, they were offering a pretty large bonus, you know, at that time. You know, I'd get to pick my duty station. Like, there were just like a lot of positive things. But then, you know, I ended up having to leave the military because of that injury. And I was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do? You know, I had about a year of physical therapy, occupational therapy to recover. And that's when I found Bitcoin. Because I was just, you know, constantly online because like what else was I going to be doing? And so like for me, I think that challenge, it was because it was a very challenging point kind of in my life. It was like I had everything all lined up. I had my plan of what I was going to do. And then all of a sudden I had to do a complete 180 and be like, yeah, am I going back to school? Am I getting a job? You know, like what am I doing after this, right? You know, like, you know, how's my recovery going to go? Like all these things, right? And then I found Bitcoin and I found these people who were like, hey, like, let's change the world. Let's build everything better. And it was just really timely. And so I think like during that challenging period, finding kind of those people who offered a much brighter kind of like potential or brighter future, it was just really kind of like changed the entire direction of my life. So I think that was that yeah, definitely a very, very influential piece that kind of set down this path.
Nice. Interesting. It's funny how you are pretty much like sitting recovering from like a life-changing injury, really, and finding your next chapter.
Exactly, right? So, yeah. And like I said, right? I think it's like combination of like putting in the effort to like surface these opportunities, right? But it's like a lot of this stuff was just luck, you know? It's like, you know, being on like, you know, all these like internet forums, you know, and the Mt. Gox crash whole fiasco happened. So it was like more kind of like current, right? A lot more people were talking about Bitcoin because of Mt. Gox, and then just happening upon an article, reading the white paper, you know, and then, you know, applying to Berkeley, getting into Berkeley, meeting all these people, you know, it's like all of these things were a combination of kind of just putting in the effort, you know, and just being open to the potential of something new. But just also a lot of luck with when I kind of hit these things. So yeah, definitely appreciative of how things played out.
Nice. I think it's not necessarily just luck, like there is an element of luck to it, but searching for your luck is also like a huge component. Are you familiar with the red car example?
Oh, yeah.
Like
Where
how
if you're
many
not
red cars have
looking
you
for
saw
red
to
cars?
Yeah, then like, if you're looking for them, you will find them. So I think the let's say go-getter mindset and kind of searching for the next thing played a huge role, because there were a lot of people who are constantly online during 2013, 2014 and didn't came across Bitcoin. No, they didn't find the white
100%.
paper. So
100%. Yeah, I think it's like, because it's kind of interesting, because it's like starting in the military, it's like, there's just like a lot of superstitions, specifically in EOD, I think, because it's like, you can do everything right, and then something subtle happens, and, just disarming the bomb doesn't go how you think it would play out, right? And so it's like, a lot of people have lucky coins, or they tie their boots a certain way, or, they just open a certain door a certain way, right? And so it's like, started collecting a lot of these like random superstitions, and it's not so much that I believe that they necessarily affect something, right? So it's not like I'm like, hey, like if I walk under a ladder, I'm cursed, But it's like, for me, I'm like, it doesn't hurt, and maybe it helps, right? Like, so
nice.
I think it's kind of interesting. Just kind of like just that mentality, like we mentioned, where it's like, you have to be open to these opportunities. You have to be looking for them. But I do think there is a component of luck, right? Where it's like, I know people who put in so much time and effort and things just haven't panned out, right? Or you start a company, it's doing fantastic, and then all of a sudden some regulatory change, right? Or some world event, or you're planning a 5,000 person conference and COVID hits, right? And it's just like, you did everything right. You put in the effort and the time, right? So it's like, I think pairing that with, sometimes things don't work out, but the more at-bats you have, or the more opportunities you're looking for, or the more opportunities you go after, it gives you more of a chance to be lucky, right? So it's
100%.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the nuance that I generally kind of ascribe to.
Nice. So I want to finish this conversation off with like some actionable insights or advice that you think you could provide others who are now looking to start their own community, or already started to build their community and want to make it better and want to grow it. Sure. What would you tell those guys?
Yeah, I think like the biggest thing is just to like look, like when you're first starting, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, like look at what other people are doing, right? I think it's like Web 2, Web 3, like I think there's just so many data points and so many thoughtful people in the space who are doing really interesting, new and novel things. And so I think like when you first start kind of setting that foundation, it's like, what are other people doing and why is that working, right? What piece of it is working, right? And then as you start to get like a more nuanced understanding, you can start to kind of pick that apart, right? And be like, I really like this community. The community is not a monolith. It's not working for everything they're doing. It's not a perfect community, right? So it's like, what are some of the things that are maybe suboptimal, or what are the points of friction? And then you can start to piece apart kind of like, what are the individual components that are really compelling? And then you can start to be more thoughtful with, how do I piece together, I like 30% of this community and 20% of this community and 30% of this community. How does this pair together? Oh, actually now this middle piece is a point of friction. Maybe this is now the bottleneck, right? And so I think just be really open to experimenting with trying things out. I think like really there's like, especially if you're kind of new or it's like your first kind of experience, there's like this fear of failure. And I think like just in generally in entrepreneurship or in community building, like the worst decision is not making a decision most of the time. If you're making a decision that leads you one step backward, that leads you just 2 steps forward, right? Or kind of like takes you slightly off course, you can always kind of adjust back and course correct back. But just kind of being stagnant and being like, hey, like I'm so worried about making the wrong choice or doing the wrong thing, you're not going to grow. So I would just say, be thoughtful, do research, kind of like set your mental model of like, why do these things work, and really do some deep research into other communities. Piece some of those together and then start doing your own experiments, and then just don't be afraid to fail, right? Don't be afraid to try things. That's how we all progress kind of as a community. Is really if we're like trying new things and learning from each other, right? And I think that's very much the spirit of Web3 is like, let's be open, let's be transparent. We have open source, we build on other people's work, right? Like we definitely want to give proper attribution to that, right? And recognize people for their contributions. But, pretty much all progress is built on the shoulder of giants, right? That's the term that's used quite a bit. And so it's like, don't be afraid to be like, hey, like this person's doing something really cool that I like. Okay, I'll copy it to some extent. But I think don't stop there. because a lot of people are saying, hey, this person figured it out. We're just going to cookie cutter that. And we're going to follow that exactly. I think that's really a missed opportunity. It's like, how do you evolve that? How do you iterate it? How do you change it and improve it? So it's like, learn, stand on the shoulders of giants, start to iterate, start to experiment, and don't be afraid of failing.
Nice. That was really good. Thank you very much, Jon, for joining us. This was a great conversation that I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value from it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If they want to check you out on social media and stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I have a very common name. So my Twitter handle is terrible, but it's like Jonathan T. Allen 1 would be my Twitter handle. kind of a mouthful. If anybody knows the at Jon Allen, who's been inactive for like 7 years, and to switch his name, like please let me know. But
we'll put the link in the description just for the sake of it.
Yeah. Put that on the ethos. But I think Twitter is probably the best place. Yeah.
Nice, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Your support for this podcast is extremely important in bringing even more incredible guests and attracting the best conversation that we can. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.